started on the adult moment, if you will. If I can have the kids come up front with me. Come sit down. Okay, but sit down on the floor so I can talk to you. Or on the chairs, whatever you want to do. We're going to chat. Okay. All right, before we get started, I have a question for you. How many of you have ever seen a lion? Like at the zoo, right?
A stuffed animal.
Or a stuffed animal. What kind of animal is a lion?
A cat.
A cat? Okay. Is it a big cat or a small cat?
Big.
What do lions eat?
Houses.
Other animals?
Gazelle.
Right? Okay, well I have a story for you today about a lion, and he was called the tawny, scrawny lion.
Hey.
Do you know what tawny means?
No.
It's
I know that story because it's on your phone.
I know. Shh. Tawny is a description word for a color, so it's kind of like a yellowy, orangey color. So that's what color the lion was. What does scrawny mean?
It means fluffy.
Fluffy? Are you sure?
No.
What does scrawny mean?
Tangly.
It means really skinny and kind of stringy and like
Gross.
doesn't look really good. So he's a orangey, yellowy lion that's kind of skinny and doesn't look really good. The tawny, scrawny lion. All right.
I know this.
So there was in this land a tawny, scrawny lion. And he was at the top of the food chain because he ate all the other critters, right? He had a very specific diet. He ate monkeys on Monday. He ate zebras on Tuesday. He ate bears on Wednesday. He ate kangaroos on Thursday. And on Fridays, he ate whatever he could find because he was hungry all the time. Now, all the other animals that lived in this area were a little bit irritated that he kept eating them. And they didn't like it. And so they gathered together in a meeting.
A soup.
No, not a soup yet. They gathered together and they put their heads together and they said, what do you think we can do to keep this lion from eating us? And the lion happened to be walking by at that point, and he overheard them, and he said, well, you know, guys, if you didn't run away from me, then I wouldn't have to chase you, and I wouldn't have to be so skinny, and I wouldn't be so hungry all the time, and maybe I wouldn't have to eat so many of you. And then he laughed and walked away. It wasn't very nice of him to say, was it? Well, all the animals decided that they were going to ask another animal to kind of take the fall for them and give them a little bit of a break. They found what they thought to be the not-so-smartest animal in the area. And so they called the rabbit over, and they said, hey, buddy, come here. We want you to go talk to the lion and explain to him that we need a break. They knew that the lion was probably going to do what with the bunny? Eat it, right? But the bunny didn't really think that was going to happen. He was happy to go talk to the lion for the other animals. And so he went over to the tawny, scrawny lion, and he said, hello, lion. And the lion goes, hello, bunny. What do you think the lion was thinking?
Yummy.
Yummy, that's right. Well, the bunny wasn't thinking that. The bunny said, lion, I have a question for you. All the other animals want you to give them a little bit of a break. And so I was wondering, would you come over to my house for dinner? Now the lion knew that the bunny had like 25 brothers and sisters that all lived in this den with this bunny. And he was thinking in his head, ooh, bunny stew, bunny sandwich, bunny on a bun. 25 bunnies, that would be enough to fill his belly, wouldn't it? So he said, well, of course I'd love to come over to your house for dinner. And the bunny said, that's great. I'll take you over there. On the way, though, we have to gather all of the ingredients for what we're having for dinner. And so the lion grudgingly walked along with the bunny as he gathered the carrots and the beets and the celery and all the other stuff that was going to go into the stew that the bunnies were making for dinner that night. And the lion said, stew, that that sounds fabulous. All that's missing is the meat. That's right. So they got to the bunny's house, and all of his 25 brothers and sisters were running around playing tag. And the lion said, well, since I'm waiting for the stew, I'll play tag with you too. And so he was playing tag with all the bunnies, and the stew was cooking. And what happens when stew cooks?
It bubbles.
It bubbles, and can you start to smell it?
Yeah.
It smells really, really good. All the onions and the celery
Wow.
and the carrots start to smell so, so good. And the lion felt that his belly was starting to grumble, and he was getting really hungry. Finally, the bunny comes over to him and he says, Mr. Tawny Scrawny, I think the stew is ready. Now, before you do anything else, I want you to sit down and have a taste of my lovely stew. And the lion thought to himself, well, this isn't going to be that big of a deal. I'll take a couple of tastes of the stew, and then I'll add the best part to it. And so he sat down, yes, the bunnies. He sat down and he started eating that stew. And did you know what? That stew was the best thing that he'd ever tasted. And it filled up his belly that was always hungry. And he had another bowl and another bowl until he had so many bowls of stew that he couldn't move because his belly was so, so full. And he thought to himself, well, I guess I don't need to add any bunnies to the stew today. But you know what the bunny did? The bunny said, you know, we have stew like this every day for supper, Mr. Lion, and I'd love for you to join us every night for supper. And Mr. Tawny Scrawny Lion, who was no longer scrawny, he was feeling rather fat and happy. He said, you know what, Mr. Bunny? I think I'd like that. And all of those little bunny brothers and sisters grew up learning that Mr. Tawny Scrawny Lion was one of the best tag players in the entire world. I know. Kind of a silly story, isn't it? What did the rabbit have to do to make this story happen? Do you think the rabbit was a little bit scared to talk to the lion?
No.
Not really. Do you think he should have been?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he should have been. Do you think the other animals set him up for failure?
Yes.
They kind of did, didn't they?
That was good.
But what was the choice that the rabbit made that kind of made the whole story? What did he ask the lion to do? Come to dinner. He asked the lion to be a part of his family, didn't he? Even though rabbits and lions are not really supposed to be the best of friends, he took a chance, didn't he? And he asked him to come to dinner. And what happened at the end? They didn't get eaten, and what else?
They got friends.
They were friends, right?
And they learned that he was the best
The best tag player in the world, that's right. So sometimes it's a hard thing for us to make a choice like that, isn't it? Sometimes it's really, really hard for us to be nice to that one kid in our class at school that maybe is not so nice to us. Sometimes it's hard for us to maybe be kind to our sisters when they're not doing what they're supposed to do. I don't know if anybody else has that problem. But anyway, that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today with the big kids. So if you want to keep listening, keep in mind what that bunny did to make friends with that Tawny Scrawny Lion, and we'll keep talking, okay? Thank you very much.
Yeah, the slideshow is on.
So I'm excited. I didn't find a place to put that in to my notes today. So now you get to hear that Tawny Scrawny Lion too. So when I was in middle school, I'm going to give you a little bit of history about myself. I had the opportunity to be involved in something called mock trial. And I don't know if they have that around here. When I was in middle school, we lived in Iowa. It was kind of a debate meets theater type of a competition. And in middle school they thought that it was the best thing ever. Students got to be prosecuting attorneys. They got to be defense attorneys. They got to pretend and be the witnesses. And every year, the state provided the case that was going to be a part of the mock trial, which consisted of the charges that were being filed and then the witness statements. There were at least 3 witnesses for each side, 3 for the defense, 3 for the prosecution. And like I said, it was a state And so the teams from the schools were expected to prepare both the prosecution and the defense, because when you got to competition, you didn't know which side you were going to be. And you would compete against other teams. The judge at the mock trial would give you a score, whether you were a witness or whether you were one of the attorneys, and then the compilation of the scores for your team, plus the verdict at the end, contributed to which team then won the competition. When I was first introduced to mock trial, the older students were preparing for the state competition, but the younger students were preparing for a mock trial, which was usually some kind of a fairy tale. In the case that I remember, the defendant was Snow White. She was being charged with breaking and entering, trespassing, and destruction of property. The witnesses were several of the dwarves, Snow White herself, the huntsman, and then maybe a village person or two that had something to say about seeing her breaking into the cabin. In the 2 or 3 years that I was able to participate, I got to prepare to be a witness. I got to be a prosecuting attorney one time. I got to be the defense attorney one time. And I remember, the only thing I remember at all about what I said as an attorney was in one of my closing statements. It was something to do with the principal of a school. And I said, in elementary school, you learn to spell principal by remembering that the principal is your pal. But what kind of pal would, whatever the charge was. Anyway, I loved the drama of the mock courtroom. And so our scripture today brought me back to those days of courtroom drama. So I want you to picture a courtroom. There's a bench up front for the judge. There's a box for the jury to the side. The defense table is set up on one side of the room, and the prosecution table is set up on the other. And there's audience people, I don't know what you call them, the audience, in the back so that they're able to watch what's going on. Into the room walks the defendant, who looks a little worse for wear. His hands are shackled in front of him, and as he stops by the defense table, the bailiff removes his handcuffs, and with a gasp, the audience realizes there's no defense attorney there. The defendant has chosen to defend himself. In the jury box is the oddest jury that you have ever seen. The jury consists of mountains and hills and the very foundations of the earth. I didn't have a good picture for that, so you just have to use your imagination. The prosecutor then walks in, and the prosecutor is none other than the great Yahweh, the creator of the universe. Not only that, but it seems that Yahweh is also to be the judge, in addition to being the prosecuting attorney. It's an interesting courtroom that we walk into this morning in Micah chapter 6. And I'm going to read through it for you and then kind of leave it up there for you to see as well, okay? So in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, hear what the Lord says. Rise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the controversy of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a controversy with his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, what have I done to you? In what have I wearied you? Answer me. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I set before you Moses, and Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now what King Balak of Moab devised, what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the saving acts of the Lord. And then in the next bit, this is Israel saying, with what shall I come before the Lord, and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? And then the prophet speaks. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. This passage in Micah uses a similar pattern to other prophets of the time, his contemporaries, if you will. The job of the prophet was to act as both a well. In this section, the writing seems to imply that the people of Israel have been complaining again about something, this time about what they feel are God's expectations of them. So Micah the prophet is bringing God's reply to their complaints. And God says, make your case. Let's put it all out on the table. Get it all out in the open. In the first section, Micah uses the word controversy, which in the translations is actually referring specifically to legal actions. God even gives Israel the chance to speak first when he says, answer me. What have I done to you? In what have I wearied you? But you'll notice, right at the very beginning, there's no answer from Israel. There's no response because the fault lies not with God. The fault lies with Israel. And I want to point out that the metaphor of a courtroom is used here to help us to understand, not to say that the issue was truly one of legal importance. The fundamental issue at stake between God and Israel has to do with a relationship that needs attention, a relationship that needs to be addressed by both the people of Israel and by God. And when Israel fails to answer God's demand of answer me, Micah knows in his bringing of this message that the people know what they did. Have you ever as a parent done that? I need you to tell me what you did, because you know. Anyway, Micah knows that the people know. God then moves on to remind them of the many things that God has done for them. God lists ways God has brought life, health, and well-being to individuals and to the community at large. Notice how God doesn't focus on the sins of the people. Rather, he reminds these people how faithful God has been in the past. It's a crucial centering that grounds the people and gives shape to what the prophet says next. God reminds them how they were rescued from slavery, how God appointed excellent leaders to lead Israel to the promised land. God reminds them of King Balak, who, if you don't know your Old Testament history, hired a prophet to curse the Israelites. However, when the prophet opened his mouth to speak the words of God, they were words of blessing. Gilgal was the stone circle that the Israelites built before attacking Jericho. And you remember how that turned out. The walls of Jericho falling at the end of the 7 days and trumpets and all of that. Over and over, through no act on the part of the Israelites, God blessed them. So God is saying to them here, oh, how quickly you forget. Stop acting like teenagers. You are my people. So the people finally answer. They feel like they have to say something at this point, essentially asking God what they can do in order to please God. Each ritual that they mention, each offering gets bigger and bigger and bigger until they suggest that maybe child sacrifice is the only way. They still sound like teenagers at this point, in my opinion. The prophet cuts him off. He's had enough. He says, it's time for me to say what I need to say. He brings that uplifting message that eases the sting of the critique that he brought earlier. What God requires is not new, nor is it complicated. He says that God doesn't want thoughtless worship. He doesn't want ritual sacrifice, which the people have all mentioned at the beginning there. God wants acts of justice, kindness toward others, and walking attentively with God. Justice here should bring thoughts of feeding the hungry, aiding the poor, standing up for the downtrodden, basic human rights. Not really the courtroom justice. I know we were in the courtroom a little bit earlier. But this kind of justice does not have the connotation of punishment. The next bit, the kindness, the word that's used for kindness in the original script could also be translated as the unbreakable connection that God has with God's people. blessing simply because. Maybe mercy or grace. Remember that justice, in the basic term, is getting what you deserve. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. And grace is getting what you don't deserve. And then the last bit, walking humbly, the word that's translated as humbly could also have been translated as carefully or attentively. So paying attention to the one that you're walking with rather than yourself. That's where that humble comes in as well. If you take them in the order that they're presented, justice, kindness, and humbleness or attention, walking with God, it can be implied that right relationships with others, the justice and the kindness bit, lead to that close walk with God. This is a theme that's carried throughout the scriptures on into the ministry of Jesus, who said that the most important commandment was to love God and to love others. There are a number of things in the news this week that I could talk to you about, but there's one thing that you may or may not have heard about that kind of runs in my purview, and it struck home for me. I work as a pharmacist at a hospital. I love my job, but I very deliberately chose the area of pharmacy that I wanted to work in. I very deliberately chose to work in a hospital as opposed to working in a retail pharmacy. I worked in a big chain store when I was a student, and although I loved interacting with the people and the fast pace most of the time was okay, I decided that retail pharmacy was not really an area that I wanted to work in. However, that's kind of me. I wanted to point out this article. It was published in the last few days in the New York Times. It has the entire pharmacy world talking, if you will. The article is entitled, "How Chaos at Chain Pharmacies is Putting Patients at Risk." Without reading the whole article to you, the journalist notes how big retailers are expecting pharmacies to do more with less, how staffing hours have been cut, how policies that are built to help consumers can actually harm them, how metrics and expectations are most times unreasonable, and how pharmacy staff are scared to speak up because of the general feeling of insecurity about their jobs. Side note on that, this last class of pharmacy students that graduated had a 50% job placement rate because of the overabundance of pharmacists in the market at this day and age. When I graduated, or when I interviewed for school, there was 120% job placement rate because there were jobs that were open everywhere. They were giving you sign-on bonuses, all that good stuff. Not the case anymore. All of these different things that are noted in the article have compounded into an environment where errors are more likely to happen. The journalist then goes on to speak of a number of errors that had happened recently, resulting in anything from headaches because of incorrect drinks that were dispensed, all the way to even the death of a patient because a wrong drug entirely was dispensed. The article has caused an explosion of discussion among one of the Facebook groups that I follow, probably among all of the pharmacists' Facebook groups, if you will. It stirred many individuals to write letters to congressmen and congresswomen on behalf of our profession. One of the retailers that was specifically cited in the article responded with a statement of their own, assuring the public that their safety is a #1 concern. Perhaps this article was a wake-up call. I'm not telling you this to scare you or to stand on a soapbox that knocks down big retailers by any means. My point is that this one article, this one journalist, identified a need. She did her research. She spoke to the people in the trenches. She presented her case without being unkind. She did what she felt was right, and she spoke for those that she felt could not or would not speak for themselves. And because one person, one journalist, did what she felt was right, others are able to speak up and speak out. I can't say what might happen, but history is full of individuals making single steps toward right things and enacting change. Over Christmas break, my mom and I took our 2 older girls to see Frozen 2. They, of course, loved it. In case you wanted to know, anything Anna and Elsa is hot right now in my house. I know all of the songs by heart. just in case you wanted to know. Anyway, at the risk of spoiling the plot, if you haven't seen it yet, close your ears. There's a spot in the movie where Anna is at the lowest that she has ever felt. This is Anna, in case you can't identify which is which. Anna is the princess who is bright, cheery, optimistic, happy. She's the one that wants to build a snowman. She's the one that is excited that the palace is going to be opened. She's the one that knows that nothing is ever going to change because her life is wonderful. At this point in the movie, Anna is sobbing in the depths of despair. She has a decision to make, one that doesn't seem to have a good answer at all, one that requires a course of action that will likely cause her to lose everything she's ever cared for. She's also lost her best friend and her sister, and she's making all of these decisions at this point in the movie all by herself. She, of course, in true Disney fashion, begins to sing, because what else do you do in the depths of despair? But she concludes, by the end of the scene, that she can't just do nothing. She must do the next right thing. Did you hear, Sawyer? And by continuing to take one step at a time, doing one right thing at a time, she can continue to love and live. Her next right thing in this movie brings justice to a people who are wronged, and it heals a broken relationship between her kingdom and theirs. So her one right thing has this avalanche of steps that happen. So what does the Lord require of us? To do justice. What is your next right thing? Where can you speak for those that cannot or will not? Love kindness. Where can you give of yourself and walk with God? Pay attention to the small nudges, the pushes, the opportunities. A friend of mine made the observation that this week, this month, there has been excitement in the air in Kansas City. I don't know why.
The Chiefs game.
I promised I was not going to say anything about anything sports related. Anyway, people are smiling at each other. They're looking each other in the eye. They're finding a commonality that's allowing them to see each other as human. At a time when so many people are divided on so many different issues, it's been kind of refreshing to see this bringing together of this bigger community that is the Kansas City area. I have a friend who kind of said that observation. And she quoted the thoughts of a gal named Brene Brown, and I spelled it wrong, it's B-R-E, on collective joy. Everyday moments of collective joy and pain with strangers, moments that remind us of our common humanity, a foundation that can support us later when we find ourselves in conflict. We have to catch enough glimpses of people connecting to one another and experiencing shared emotion that we believe in our inextricable connection. When we're able to see that connection, when they're no longer just other, it's so much easier to see that next right thing, to do justice, to love kindness, and to continue to walk with God. President Veazey, in his words of counsel at the conclusion of the 2019 World Conference, shared this sentiment. The love, message, and embrace of Jesus Christ are broad beyond measure. By their very nature, they must be shared widely, or they're not shared at all. They're not limited to just me, my kind of people, or some preferred nation, culture, or race. If we truly are moving toward and with Jesus, then the church community constantly will venture beyond all kinds of perceived boundaries and horizons to invite others to drink deeply of Christ's life-giving water in loving community. Scripture testifies that all creation waits with eager longing for peaceful humanity to appear on the world stage to turn the tide of hate, agony, and destruction. Are we moving toward Jesus, the peaceful one? As we do, move toward Jesus. We move ourselves closer to those who are in need and toward a vision that Jesus gives us of the peaceful kingdom in the Gospel of Matthew. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. The words of counsel also include this connection to our actions today in the sacrament of communion. Additional meaning is waiting to be discovered in the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Renewing covenant with Jesus Christ includes the call to live as peaceful human beings who personify Christ's peace. Spiritual blessing can be experienced when this call is emphasized as a vital aspect of the sacrament. Cherish opportunities to be spiritually formed by Christ's meal of remembrance, reconciliation, renewal, and peace. Then go with conviction into the locations of your discipleship and be the peace of Christ. May we be spiritually formed